Thank you for joining me for this Beltane Rune reading, which covers the period from Beltane, or May Day, the 1st of May, until the summer solstice, the 21st of June. So I'm now going to share my screen with you, and as most of you know, I am not the most dexterous at doing this. So I ask that you bear with me. Let me just make that bigger. There we are. Okay. So I selected the 3 runes, as I always do, without looking at them. I just put them in a bowl and dip my fingers in, and out they come. And then I cast them onto the table. And how they fall is very relevant to how I read. And here we have Ervas, or acre, Gebo, Gurv, which means gift, and Noitbis, or Noith, also known as Nade, which means need. There's a big link with this rune between what is necessary and what is needed, among other things, among the releasing of ties, the necessary letting go. And I'm just going to now move on to the themes, if I can do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. See how I move on here. Here we are. So this time it's worked. So to summarize very briefly, and I always say a little bit more than I put in writing on the screen. First of all, I will say I selected these runes yesterday on the 12th of April, and I'm actually recording this reading on the 13th of April. I always like to do them a little bit in advance, and it's very interesting sometimes to observe how things develop in that period between my reading them and the point that is being point in time that the reading commences. Here we have Ervas, or acre, which for me always highlights the issues of partnerships, both our own personal partnerships, but in this kind of reading much more within and between factions, societies and countries. And when it falls as reverse and pointing towards the left, so that it looks like an M with the top part towards the left, this draws attention to quite a large number of situations that are in advanced stages of falling apart, unless they can be placed on completely new foundations or undertaken in an entirely different way. This would require radical change. But sometimes that is possible, and other times there will be situations where things do need to come apart. And Gebo draws our attention to the benefits of wise decisions at this time. And in this context, a wise decision can sometimes be a hands-off approach and allowing things to come apart, obviously steering things a little bit so that it's as graceful as possible, but not trying to prevent a process that is already underway. And other times, really strong radical decisions and strong new commitments are needed. This is the rune that we say represents commitment. It will, as well as decision. It will often show, for example, when a couple are deciding to live together or to get married, when somebody is buying a home, when they're literally signing on the dotted line in the place marked with an X. And also, of course, when anything major in life is being undertaken, this tends to show up. And so this is talking about the big issues, the big interactions within and between groups and societies and countries that will be highlighted in a way. I'm expecting them to be highlighted in a way that they really claim our attention. And that doesn't have to be in a scary way. Of course, we know that 1 or 2 things that show up in the wider world at the moment do make us feel a little bit scared. And change can always be a bit scary. But it's more about thinking here, what can we do? What can we create? What has outlived its usefulness? And the issue of what has outlived its usefulness and the need to walk forwards from that is further emphasized by Nordbiz or Noith, which speaks of letting go, of cutting ties sometimes in a way that is difficult to do. You know, if we've hung on to something that we want to improve, to come right, maybe we've been waiting for something that, you know, something to start up again, maybe something that, I don't know, stopped, because I can think of something relevant to me that stopped during the time of COVID. And I was hoping for it to get going again. I was hoping for this group that I really liked to go to, that it would start up again. But it actually hasn't. And now the people that were leading that group that I really enjoyed have kind of come apart a little bit. So I just have to accept that the likelihood is that nothing further is going to happen here. And, you know, to say, well, I've got to walk forwards from that. And, you know, maybe I could start something when I'm in the right place at the right time. That's possible. Or maybe it's had its day and it is time to look out for something that is entirely different. That could be a possibility here. And I think many are in this situation with their own lives. But once again, in this reading, it's more about what do we want? What has been outlived? Or if it hasn't been outlived, we might still think, well, I'd really like that to happen. I find that useful. But, you know, sometimes we have to accept that it's not going to happen. And if that is the case, then we have to walk forwards. We have to let go of the tie, the attachment, the hope that we felt in relation to that, and generate hope in relation to something else. And this also fits very well with the theme of Nordbiz, which is so much about what is needed and what is necessary. The feeling that something is necessary, but we don't have it, can be very relevant. But under this influence, it's saying, take an honest look, see if what you feel is necessary has outlived the period when it would have been necessary and you actually need something else. Or see what you can do to create that which is necessary. And I feel that this is very relevant to the changes that we would like to see in society at this time, because of what we are having to let go of, but also what we want to let go of. Because sometimes we just think, particularly after last year, when so many situations had all of these little fixes applied to them, and then, you know, it still hasn't worked. It's still not working properly. It's still not right. And the need to let go, the need to be brave enough in a way to step into the unknown, to seek that inspiration that can take us forwards, those ideas that are perhaps different, those ideas also that can come up in a way. And I believe this is something we have to focus on. How can ideas come up? How can they receive worthy exploration when maybe the way people have become so polarized in the way that they look at situations, so black and white, that it can be quite difficult to bring new things into the light of day and explore them gently without one faction pouncing on them and saying, this is fabulous, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I don't eat sliced bread, by the way, not often. Or having somebody else, another faction, say, this is terrible. We can't allow this, and really trying to stop it. I feel there has to be a better sense of allowing exploration here before we will say that something, cannot be, that it's very black and white, because so many things are shades of grey or colour. And, why can, some people fear the existence of opposing things because they feel that what they want is threatened. And I feel that, this is something that we've got to try as a society, as groups, as countries, to try to get over a little bit better than we have, and to try to say, well, how can we have two opposing things in existence without one trying to push the other aside because they feel threatened by it? And coexistence, a coexistence of existence, in a way, is what I am talking about. And I know that it has been done in many different ways, but I just feel that recent years, especially the COVID years, have made people more willing to express things in a very polarized way, more willing to say, I am right and you are wrong. And of course, sometimes, if we are talking about whether there is a certain shop in town, we are either right or we are wrong, aren't we? But there are many times when what we want in life, what we feel is important, we don't all order the same things from life's catalogue. And it is one of those things that I feel tolerance in this way has narrowed. But the overall picture here is really about feeling that many things have brought us to a crunch point. And as I've already said in other readings, I do feel there's a series of them this year. And I feel that the beginning of this, I know there's already signs of certain dissatisfaction. I know that, for example, in France, there are big protests about the bringing forward of the pension age taking place in all different parts of France today, for example. I know that there are doctors' strikes in the UK, but what I feel is that what's really going to start to bring this to a crescendo of looking at, having to look at this, having to deal with it, is going to be around the 23rd of April, in the week actually before Beltane, that there's a certain rising with a rush of situations that are presenting as broken under simply intolerable strain, or even that they are being pulled apart. And we do have to remember the theme of Beltane, has within it the fire of creation. And I feel that in this aspect, at this time, the fire of creation has so much to give us, because whenever there is a breaking apart, whenever we show commitment or decisiveness to something new, and when we do that, Gebo is the rune that is here that actually reminds us that when we do that, when we can show commitment or decisiveness in respect to something new, or even the early stages of development, or wanting to float ideas for something new, then Gebo normally gives us a little extra something that we did not expect, that we couldn't have expected. So that is a nice thought. I'm just now going to move on a bit, if I can here. It's not always easy with this. We're here. So, on the theme of the fire of Beltane, we know that fire is both a creative force, and we think of it as being very creative at Beltane because the fire within nature is rising. Everything is growing, ready for the height of the summer and the early harvest. And It's that life force, it's that feel-good factor that we must not forget to celebrate, regardless of what is going on around us. But with the flourishing of growth at Beltane, I think it's always good to remember that everything goes in cycles. And, at all times, cycles are ending and other cycles are being born in nature, in systems, in our individual lives. But with this, we can look at what fire can create. Fire can be both creative and destructive, in that it can take away what was, and it can produce something beautiful and new. And in Iceland, in our landscape, we have so many reminders of this, because minerals from the ash, from the magma that pours out of the volcano, does literally foster fertility within the land, because those minerals help to fertilize. And yet that magma that rises as magma and becomes lava as it pours forth releases toxic gases that are themselves destructive in large quantities. And also, they're poisonous, in other words, but also the landscape is changed forever. And that is the creative part. The picture here is of a wonderful place in North Iceland, near Mývatn, which is a wonderful lake, and it is called Dimmuborga. Translates roughly as the dark cities. And these exquisite lava forms that you see in the image, they were created in a very powerful volcanic eruption that destroyed what was already there, but created something of great beauty that is admired now by people who come from all around the world. So when we look at those endings, those things that are coming apart, those things that individually or collectively we feel the need to walk on from, but we find it difficult, we know that this is part of life. It's part of what nature creates. It's part of what humanity has always experienced in the lives that each of us live. But at the same time, we also know the importance of letting go, the letting go that can be hard, so that new creations can take place in our hearts, minds, and lives, and in the life that goes on around us. And whilst crunch points are not just about endings or complications and new beginnings, they are also pivotal points, fabulous pivotal points that allow us to consider and evaluate where we stand on things, our own tolerance levels, what triggers us, what makes us feel peaceful, what makes us feel excited, and our own individual priorities may promote question marks that can be unsettling, and yet they are very, very important when we are witnessing a cluster of status quos, of cooperation, or of coexistence, outliving their purposes, with many apparently doing so all at once. And admitting that we feel overwhelmed, taking a breath, going for a walk in nature, doing a meditation or listening to a piece of music, can be very important, because these things help us to calm ourselves and to also gather the courage that can be necessary to avoid shying away from exploring the bigger questions in our lives, and adapting the way that we interact with life, evaluating what we can change, observing what has changed, and adapting our own ways to what is around us, and also to the need to create, to be creative, because this isn't just about walking away from that which we have to acknowledge has ended, or walking away from that which we would like to end and feeling really good about it. It is about what we would like to build, what we would like to create, what we would like to see come into fruition in our own lives, that we can start to generate, to develop now. That is always an important part of Beltane. When we look at the May Day celebrations, there's the union between the Green Man and the May Queen, symbolising the union between earth and sky. And I'm going to say between all of the elements and how they interact. And we have many elements within our bodies that no doubt resonate on a subtle level with the elements that are out there. And what we experience as life is actually a relationship between inner and outer, between giving and receiving, between doing and resting. And we all have our own ideas for questions, exploratory questions to ask at this time. And mine are, what is most important to us? And by us, I mean me as an individual, but also collectively. What are the keynotes of the tune that we would like to create now? And of course also that I would like to create now. And what seeds is it more important and happiest for us to cultivate this spring? Myself, I'm thinking of making a little indoor herb garden. And of course, I think about those herbs that I use most in a culinary way. For example, mint, basil, parsley, coriander. And then I'm sort of thinking, what do I want anymore? But when I go to the garden centre to get my seeds, I might well find that I see something and I want to get that too. And it's like that, isn't it? This time of year, this feeling of wanting to grow, wanting to develop. And I came back from my few days away in the north of Iceland to be greeted by a wonderful blessing. One of my pot plants that I didn't think of as a flowering plant. It was given to me as a gift 5 years ago. And whilst it has grown, I have never ever seen a flower on it. And then suddenly there is this beautiful flower, and there are several other flowers that are beginning to open out. And it really was a wonderful homecoming gift, one that I did not expect. But to come back to intuitions and inspirations, whenever situations become broken or feel broken, There are tenuous threads that point forwards. They're usually just dangling ideas, a fleeting thought, a moment of inspiration. And we don't always feel like looking out for such pointers. But these tendrils, some of them only exist as the subtle hint of an incipient form, in the same way that my pot plant no doubt harboured an incipient capacity to create flowers that I didn't know was there. And these incipient forms, these mere suggestions that can occur in a momentary thought, can be so fragile and transient that they can only be captured in that brief moment, or they can hover there for a period of time and sort of prod us, saying, take notice of me. And there is no way to know which will be most valuable. But such moments, the transient moments, the ones that can only be captured in the immediate moment, and they have to be taken then and worked with, or they will dissipate and vanish. Such moments do sometimes become the fabric of history. We may be reluctant to put effort into nurturing anything much during these delicate and embryonic and yet turbulent times. However, these messenger threads from infinity will only survive when we confer our protection, because they need our hearts, minds, and hands. And we should listen with our hearts and souls, as well as our ears, to the story of something that longs to become part of existence. This kind of conversation takes place essence to essence, and it is spoken in gossamer whispers. Our responses are the gifts that will determine which and how many of these potential forms will find their way into life. And there are so many potential forms, millions and millions, billions and billions of potential forms that are never given life. Maybe some are not meant to, but I do think that the universe kind of creates many, many seeds of potential, in the knowledge that many will be wasted, in the same way that nature will scatter many seeds, knowing that often many will be wasted, but that others will create life forms of great beauty. But in being open to these merest suggestions of potential, we can be like the pourers of the water that moisten the soil and help the flower to raise itself above the earth to be greeted by the sun. And many of these forms can become the equivalent when we bless them with our love of a beautiful flower. Thank you for joining me. Even though I can't see you, I really enjoy knowing that I have the company of people when I do these sharings.